Great to have you along. We are joined, as always, by Greg Engert, beer director for the neighborhood restaurant group of Food and Wine Sommelier of the Year. The group including Vermilion and Columbia Firehouse in Old Town, Eat Bar in Arlington. Greg, it is always good to see you.
See you.
What is on tap this week?
So this week we have a really rare, wonderful beer from Allagash Brewing Company out of Portland, Maine. This is one of those beers that reinforces some of the most craft things about craft beer, because this beer has literally been aging for 4 years. It was brewed 4 years ago, and it's been sitting in an oak tank called a foeder for the past 4 years. So, sometimes we talk about craft beer versus macro beer, and I think a lot of times I think of non-craft beer as that which is brewed with profit and efficiency as the guiding principles, and craft beer is obviously has to care about staying in business and profit and efficiency, but is starting out with flavor as the guiding principle. And when breweries like Allagash choose to brew and mature 2,700 gallons of wild beer for 4 years and then release it in its beautiful state when it's ready, this is kind of like one of those beers that is certainly done with flavor first in mind and really not caring about how much money you could be made off of it. So it's called FV 13, and it was actually bottled in February of 2013. And like I said, aged in a foeder. So what they did is 4 years ago, they brewed a somewhat strong, kind of maltier amber ale, and then they placed it into this oak foeder. So foeders are giant barrels, and they're used a lot in the wine industry and in the spirits industry, and increasingly in the beer industry. They've been used to make like Flemish red ales for a long time, like Rodenbach has giant wood foeders. And foeders are interesting because since they're so huge, they have really thick staves. And the bigger the barrel, the more liquid that is inside. And foeders can be anywhere from 500 gallons to over 3,000 gallons worth. This one's a bigger one at 2,700 gallons. The more beer inside a barrel, the less interaction the beer has by surface area with the barrel. So the barrel itself will affect the flavors of the beer kind of less this way. Oftentimes in winemaking, foeders are used when you want to deter the barrel activity and flavor onto the wine and preserve more of just the varietal character.
So you don't want to fill it up all the way?
No, you fill it all the way.
You do fill it reverse.
It's just imagine if you had a 60-gallon oak barrel. The amount of flavors of the barrel on the 60 gallons worth of beer would be much more intense than they would be in a 2,700 gallon.
Right, yeah.
So that's what's really cool. So aging it this way will keep the beer from becoming too tannic or too buttery and caramelly and vanilla, although you're getting some of those flavors from the wood and it's in the malt. The other thing that's cool is that these thicker staves are less porous. So you have less of an oxidized character coming in over time. In smaller barrels, oxidation can occur more quickly. So what they've done in the meantime is they've added in wild yeast and bacteria into the foeder. So over 4 years, most likely the lactobacillus will give you this wonderful, refreshing tartness. Brettanomyces will start to develop some funkier, leathery, rustic characteristics in the beer as well, and some fruity qualities.
You can smell it from here.
Oh yeah, it's
one
big.
Of those.
It's a big one.
Great color.
Ooh, that's pretty amazing stuff.
That is good. I don't know if quite had anything like that. The mix between it's not overly tart.
No.
But is there a brown sugar?
Yeah, it's got
I'm tasting?
Yeah,
and
okay. That's what it's like. It's not added. It's the malt character is still there. Some of the oak notes will come through and give you that kind of toasty, oaky, kind of spicy quality. It's almost brown sugary for sure, but it's beautifully balanced. And the other thing about filling a barrel all the way, or filling a foeder all the way up and having less porous wood means less oxygen. And less oxygen means less possibility for Acetobacter. Acetobacter is responsible for making acetic acid, which is vinegar. And some sour beers today taste really nothing more than just kind of beery vinegar sometimes, which is unfortunate.
Yum.
But true artists of sour beer are really careful to keep Acetobacter out. They do not want any kind of acetic acid coming through. A touch here and there is no big deal, but you don't want it to overwhelm. And I get almost none of it here. I mean, the acidity here is a delicate tang of lactic acid rather than acetic.
Yeah, it's not tart. But still, just that tinge. It's intriguing.
It's almost 9% alcohol too, which does not taste that.
No, not at all. We've talked in the past couple of weeks about historical beer making practices and people going back to them in certain parts. In certain part. Do craft brewers, does some of this stuff come to them in the middle of the night, like the opening riff for Satisfaction came to Keith Richards?
Yeah.
How they think about, okay, I'm going to do it in this certain size and in this certain vessel. Is it all what they've learned or read about? Well, I know a lot of it is experimental, too.
It is experimental.
That's a real concise question.
But the thing is about craft brewers is they're endlessly curious. So, I don't know many craft brewers who don't geek out at visiting other people's breweries or seeing what other people are doing and drinking what other people are doing, reading books, going to seminars. We just had CBC in town. Like, craft brewers love beer, and they love learning and thinking about it as much as they love drinking it and producing it. Most of them have made pilgrimages to Belgium, and they've seen this in the, they've seen it right up front, up close. But at the same time, I think there's a certain degree of experimentation where it's like, well, let's just see what would happen if we did this. And, a lot of craft brewers, they know their reputation is everything. So if something doesn't work out, as much as you'd hate to dump it, a lot of brewers will do that. They'll do lots of test batches to figure out the recipe that they want to actually produce. It's calculated, it's art, but it's craft. It's a lot of experimentation, and they work on things over and over and over again. And the other thing about sour beers is blending is an art. In this case, there was no blend because it was all out of one foeder, which is also, just so we're talking about it, 2,700 gallons is roughly 160, 170 full-size kegs. That's it. So that's a really small amount of beer. But normally it's blended too. So, if you put a bunch of beer into a bunch of barrels and you want to come up with something that tastes, a bottling that all tastes the same, and maybe you have a couple irascible barrels that didn't really give you what you want, you just use a little bit from that, and it's the blend is as much the art as the brewing.
And we've talked about this a number of times before, and I think this qualifies as a good introductory beer if you're turned off by the idea of sour beer, or maybe you had a sip one time that just smacked you in the lips or in the face.
Lips is better, I think.
A very good beer to try if you want to ease your way into that style of beer.
The funny thing is, like, one could say that it's funny because, it's more complex because it's less intense. This is balanced. It's one of the better sour beers that I've had in a very, very long time because of the complexity that comes through the microorganisms that give you acidity. We call them sours, but really we're talking about funky, wild character. And it's got that. And like you said, it's got this amazing malt, brown sugar sweetness to balance that is really singular.
So on that note, what would you pair this with?
So typically a beer like this, I'm looking at it and I'm thinking, before tasting it, I'd imagine it's more intensely sour, maybe more fruity, more vinous. And I'd think of things like, darker game meat. I still think it would work.
I just thought about venison.
Venison, yeah. I still think it would definitely work.
I've learned so much in the past year and 4 months.
Venison, but at the same, duck I think is a no-brainer, especially because honey glaze on duck is what we do at Birch and Barley. Is amazing. So that brown sugar sweetness would be just as good as the acid to dig into the duck's richness. Also duck confit and things like that. But I don't know why. But now I'm thinking, maybe it's because we're just talking about it. I'm tasting this malt. It's got malt sweetness, but also acidity. I would love to do this with dessert, because I think of creme brulee.
Yeah.
And this, because you've got this cool kind of fruited acidity to dig into the custard. It would be really cool. It almost tastes like sorbet on its own. I don't know. It just seems like desserty to me today.
There's also some of those great desserts where they have a layer of, I think it's just toasted butter, and then maybe some butterscotch ice cream, and then that little wafer again, and it's a tower.
Yeah, it's like parfait.
That seems like
amazing.
It would be good too.
I'm thinking butterscotch and cream and curd and custard, things like that would be really awesome for this. And that's really cool because you wouldn't, it's coming out of a big oak foeder with lots of wild yeast and bacteria, and you're starting to think sour, sour, sour. How are we going to handle it? I'm actually thinking this is a great, final thing. Or you start it at the end of the main course, then you bring out the dessert. really awesome.
And real quick before we go, this is not your typical bottle. It's not a bomber. I mean, obviously it looks like a mini wine bottle. It's dark, which is good.
Yep.
You've talked about. Is there a particular reason that bottle was chosen?
Oh yeah, this is classic actually. This is classic, like corked and caged. It's thicker. It's thicker bottle too, so it's reinforced because this beer is re-fermented in the bottle. And even Allagash even graciously says, "Open cautiously, contents under pressure." So this is kind of like your normal half bottle of brut wine or champagne. 375 milliliters, which is 12.7 ounces. It's a move that we're seeing happening more and more. Russian River does it, in fact. Like a lot of their sours and a lot of their beers actually come in 12.7 ounce bottles. And more and more people are getting into this because, one thing is this. I mean, if you only have 2,700 gallons of something to put it into, and you want to put it in bottles because you love that re-fermentation, the natural carbonation just gives it that creamy quality on the palate and the aromas, it's great. But you can get twice as many units in this bottle than you could in a 750. And so the more to kind of go around. And if you're talking about like on-premise sale, if I want to sell a beer like this at a bar, it might be easier to do so in a smaller package than in a larger one because it makes it ultimately less expensive.
Okay. Remember, you're alive and so is your beer.
That's right.
If you've got a question for Greg, here is the email. It is beeroftheweek@WTOP.com. Greg, thank you as always.
Thank you.
Appreciate it. Everyone, please always do drink responsibly and be sure to bring your thirst next time for another Beer of the Week.